Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 14 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive coverage. The idea is to ensure that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you're looking to enroll for our online classes, this would be the perfect opportunity as Unacademy is providing its lowest price ever. With a flat 60% off, now you can avail our subscription at just 16,999. So these upcoming classes, they will give you access to all our live and recorded lectures by our top educators, along with the study material, the test series, and as well as mentorship sessions. I'm told this offer will end tomorrow. On the subscription page, you might see a different price. But to avail the discount, you have to enter the code IAS English. So those interested, please check out the details by clicking on the link provided in the description box below. With this, let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 8, there's an editorial on the topic of heat waves in India. Currently, as we speak, India is in the grip of a very intense and severe heat wave across different parts of the country. The IMD, India Meteorological Department, has issued heat wave alerts across multiple states from Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, even Odisha, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana belt towards western parts of India as well, towards Gujarat. And even states like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala are registering extremely abnormal temperatures. Usually, the heat wave in India tends to begin May onwards, and particularly towards the north and the western parts of India, it can even extend all the way till the June July period. Whereas if you look at the southern and central parts of India, usually such extreme temperatures they are seen between the months of April to June. And once the monsoon arrives, there is a slight moderation in the temperature levels that happen. But this period in the pre monsoon season is where the extreme risk is present because exposure to such deadly heat conditions can have disastrous implications on human health, on animal health, as well as on plant productivity. So, this is a very serious concern as global temperatures keep rising. The recurring occurrence of heat wave conditions with greater frequency, with greater intensity, is something which causes a lot of concern for policymakers across the world. So, first, let's understand how exactly a heat wave is defined and what are the criteria that are used by IMD to declare the start of a heat wave condition. And then we'll discuss the impact of heat waves. And then we will discuss as to what India is doing to combat the threat posed by heat waves. As per the classification of IMD, different temperature thresholds are used depending on the altitude of the place. Whether the region is a plain region or a hilly area or a coastal area, this plays a very big role in determining the heat that you're going to feel, as humidity plays a very, very big factor. Places in coastal belt that tend to be more humid, which register very high wet bulb temperature, where even if you sweat, the sweat doesn't evaporate quickly, not allowing your body to cool down. And that's where the highest heat risk is present physiologically. So, depending on the topography, different thresholds are set by the IMD. So, for plains, a temperature of 40 degrees, for hilly areas, a temperature of 30 degrees and above is considered as the minimum criteria for declaring a heat wave. And if the temperature departure from the normal is in the range of 4.5 to 6.4 degrees, then it is declared as a heat wave condition. A severe heat wave occurs when the departure from normal is above 6.4 degrees Celsius. But however, These readings will have to be recorded at least in two meteorological stations in a given region for 2 consecutive days. When such readings are recorded, then depending on the deviation from the normal, a heat wave or severe heat wave is declared. Then, on the basis of actual maximum temperature, AMT, and to what extent AMT is different from normal maximum temperature. If, let's say, AMT is greater than or equal to 45 degrees, this also signals the start of a heat wave. If AMT is greater than or equal to 47 degrees, it signals the start of a severe heat wave. For coastal areas which face very high levels of humidity, 37 degrees Celsius or more is treated as the threshold, and any temperature deviation of 4.5 degrees or more leads to the declaration of the start of a heat wave in the coastal belt. So when you look at the health impact, especially on human physiology, exposure to extreme heat will of course result in dehydration. And extreme dehydration could increase the heat stress, leading to heat cramps, where muscles start cramping up, and it could result in heat exhaustion, which is a serious physiological condition. And if timely treatment is not provided with rehydration and with the right cooling solutions, if this timely support is not provided, then there is a risk of heat stroke, especially if the internal body temperature rises beyond a certain level. It could even lead to multi organ failure. It could place significant stress on the cardiovascular system, leading to cardiac arrest and multi organ failure, which could result in the death of the individual as well. And every year, India witnesses many such deaths because of heat waves. And the worst part is that the poor and the migrant workers and the manual laborers, they are primarily at the receiving end of this particular hazard. As migrant laborers, manual workers, agricultural laborers, they are forced to work in the open, especially during the peak heat season, during the time duration of, let's say, around 11 a.m. to 4 p.m., when the maximum heat is expected. So, the constant exposure, because of livelihood reasons, that places the vulnerable communities at greatest risk of being affected by heat waves. So, those who have access to shelter, cooling solutions, including air conditioners or even a basic fan, drinking water, electrolytes, those who have access to such cooling solutions and rehydration solutions, they never face the impact of a heat wave. But it's primarily the poor migrant workers, manual laborers, daily wage workers, etc. And even those who work out in the open, could be athletes as well. They could also face similar physiological stress. But heat waves' impact is not just limited to the implications on human physiology. It could even impact animals. It could affect our ecosystems and biodiversity. And more importantly, it has a detrimental impact on plants and plant productivity. And this is extremely dangerous as far as food security is concerned. If plant productivity is affected, the overall agricultural productivity can take a hit. And these high abnormal temperatures could affect the shelf life of perishable commodities like fruits, vegetables, even cereals, etc. And without proper storage and cold storage solutions, you face a greater risk of food spoilage. And as a result, this could have a direct impact on food security, and it could even lead to the spread of diseases. So this is a cyclical, a chain effect that is seen in the case of heat waves, and hence it's of utmost priority across the world to have measures in place to combat heat waves, at least to mitigate the impact. So let's see what India is doing to deal with heat waves. The institutional response is that we have a heat action plan at the national, state, and district level. It goes all the way down to the local level where heat action plans are in place. But unfortunately, these heat action plans, they're not adequately funded. Public funding is not adequate. And we don't have adequate legislative interventions to protect workers in the informal sector. Though governments bring out regulations which mandate contractors and employers not to force workers to work in the open during peak heat season, it's often violated. The norms are often broken. And employers and contractors, they also have an obligation to provide basic facilities, provide shelter, cooling solutions, enough water and electrolytes. But at workplaces, usually these precautions are not taken. And you need to gear up the public healthcare system as well to deal with these cases of heat stress and heat exhaustion, to provide timely intervention in order to prevent a heat stroke. But on the ground, this is often missing. There is a lack of legislative intervention, lack of public funding for implementing heat action plans. And as a result, the country pays a very heavy price every year during the summer months. And it's usually the poor people, the migrants, manual workers, even agricultural laborers who pay the price. So that is the reason why India should prioritize heat wave mitigation and adaptation measures as part of disaster planning and preparedness. India should focus on regreening initiatives, especially in urban areas. Bringing back the green cover can have a moderating effect. Protecting the lakes and wetlands, rejuvenating such water bodies could also have a moderating effect. So, the natural green buffer is extremely critical to help moderate such high temperatures. Also, ensuring constant power supply without interruption so that people can make use of cooling solutions. What is the use of your fans, air conditioners, and coolers if the government can't provide electricity? Right? And usually it's during the summer months that we often witness load shedding, as it's difficult to meet the surge in demand for power. That's where it is important to step up power production primarily from clean renewable sources of energy so that uninterrupted power supply can be maintained to ensure that cooling solutions are available. Because most studies are indicating that in the coming years and decades, we would see much more frequent and intense heat waves. And it could even test the very survivability of humans. Humans could be pushed to the very edge of human survivability. So, as a result, it's very important to implement such heat action plans with adequate public funding to strengthen public health institutions and ensure that there are legal measures in place to protect workers who are working out in the open. So, based on this, you can take up a practice question that I've added over here and please use it for your mains answer writing practice. Now, in this editorial, there is a reference to a new parallel climate conference that Colombia has called for. The article is referring to the parallel climate conference that Colombia is hosting, and it is urging India also to participate because this new climate conference is focused on transitioning away from fossil fuels in the fastest and efficient and equitable manner possible because the climate change convention has not been able to achieve these goals. So I believe that this topic can be very, very important for your prelims exam. Colombia, along with Netherlands, they are co-hosting the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels. They have brought around 50 plus countries together. Countries like Australia, Canada, Norway, Brazil, they're all part of this initiative. And the conference has already begun on 23rd, 24th of April. And if the talks progress, we might see the signing of the first fossil fuel treaty. The goal is to bring out a formal fossil fuel treaty which can bring binding commitments, legally binding commitments on the participating countries to transition away from fossil fuels. Because under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, this goal has not been achieved. Under Paris Agreement, you don't have any binding targets to transition away from fossil fuels. Countries are only declaring voluntary commitments under their nationally determined contributions. So Colombia, with Netherlands and other like-minded countries, are hosting the first conference on transitioning away from fossil fuels to debate and bring out the first fossil fuel treaty. India, China, US, they're all not part of it. That's why the article is urging India to consider to take part in this initiative led by Colombia. Now let's move to the next topic. On page 8 and 16, we have a couple of articles that is related to the ongoing war against Lebanon. We've been discussing over the past few days how Israel has carried out massive bombardment across Lebanon, even in crowded cities like Beirut, where hundreds of innocents have been killed, along with Hezbollah militants. Finally, with the US exerting pressure on Israel, a 10-day ceasefire was called between them. And just a few hours ago, the US has mediated fresh talks between Lebanese representatives and Israeli representatives in Washington, and they have agreed upon a 3-week ceasefire. So, this brings the much needed relief for the civilian population in Lebanon, which has been basically caught in this crossfire that has spread across West Asia over the last 7 decades. Usually, Lebanon is seen as a side story in the larger West Asian conflict. When you look at Israel-Palestine issue, or Israel's conflict with Hamas, Israel's conflict with Iran, and Iran's proxies that form the axis of resistance, the story of Lebanon and the story of the people of Lebanon is often lost because Lebanon has been dragged and it has been placed and sandwiched in between this raging conflict in West Asia, which has affected the country and its people for more than 7 decades. So, this is an opportunity for us to understand the history of Lebanon, the role it has played in West Asian politics, why Hezbollah turned Lebanon into its base, why Israel keeps targeting Lebanon, that too with brutal, disproportionate force. That is something we can learn because this article is written by a former Indian ambassador, Mahesh Sachdev. He provides a beautiful insight into what's happening in Lebanon. So let's start from the beginning. See, Lebanon sits at the crossroads of Europe and Asia. It's part of the Levant region that faces the Mediterranean Sea, and it shares this border with Israel. To the north of Israel, that's where Lebanon is located, facing the Mediterranean coast, and it shares a small 79-kilometer border with Israel. On the other side, it shares a very important border with Syria. So it is this location of Lebanon which makes it strategically important, and that's also the reason why it has been caught in this conflict. Its location to the north of Israel, located right next to Syria and having a Mediterranean coast. That's what makes Lebanon so attractive for various regional players and powers involved in the ongoing conflict in West Asia. Historically, Lebanon has been at the crossroads of the cultural and economic exchanges between Europe and Asia. Generally, Lebanon was seen as a moderate country with a mixed population of different sects and ethnicities and religions. You not only find Arab Muslims, you also find Christians, you also find Shia Sunni population. But the country is predominantly a Shia country with a significant Christian population as well. So the complex ethnic and communal profile of the country also makes it vulnerable. And external powers have often misused the demographics of Lebanon to use it as a springboard. They have quite literally used Lebanon as part of this chessboard, as a spring to launch their covert campaigns. That's what Iran has done, that's what Israel has done. And there are other powers involved as well, which have used Lebanon to their advantage. So, to understand what happened in Lebanon, we need to go back. We need to look at the very root of the Israel Palestine question. See, in 1947, the United Nations had proposed the two state solution, the two state plan. to carve out the Palestinian mandate, which was under the British mandate, right, following World War One, when the Ottomans had lost the conflict. The area of Palestine today and part of the Levant, which was under the Ottomans, it had come under British mandate. Following which, the Palestinians were directly threatened by the Zionist movement to bring back the Jewish community post Second World War, to create a Jewish homeland. So this led to direct communal clashes between Arab Palestinian Muslims and the Zionist Jews. So eventually, the most viable solution, according to the UN, which was a newly established body post Second World War, was to create two states, a two-state solution to carve out the territory of the Palestinian mandate, to create a separate nation for Palestinian Arab Muslims and a separate Jewish state for the Jews. But of course, this was a communal partition, largely a division being drawn on religious lines. And the Zionist movement itself was largely backed by UK, US, and the West, with no consent taken from Palestinians or the Arab population in this region. So it was a forceful imperial approach to carve out the region and to create a new homeland for people of this region who had been inhabiting this territory for a long time. So when the two-state plan was proposed, many countries were against it, including India, primarily on ideological lines, given our stand against colonialism, imperialism, and the way they were dividing the world on communal lines. India itself was a victim of one such communal partition. Many countries opposed such a two-state plan initially. But as the scale of violence escalated between the Zionists and the Palestinians, the two-state plan was seen as the only viable solution to settle the conflict. But right before the plan could be implemented, in 1948, Israel unilaterally declared independence. This in itself was illegal. With the backing of UK and US, which were influential at the UN, with massive funding and arms supplies coming from the West, Israel blatantly declared independence on its own without allowing Palestine to ever be created. And very quickly, Israel went on to occupy Palestinian territory. And today, Palestinian territory is essentially compressed into these small pockets of Gaza and West Bank. That's why these territories are considered to be under Israel's illegal occupation as well, as Israel has enhanced its control over Palestinian territories. So, as a result of this catastrophe, which the Arabs call as the Nakba, more than 1 lakh Palestinians who became refugees, they took shelter in Lebanon, especially in Beirut and in southern Lebanon. Since Palestinian territory was taken over and Israel established itself with unilateral force, with backing from Western powers, lakhs of Palestinian refugees were driven out from here. Many of them fled to Egypt to take refuge. Many of them fled to Transjordan, which is today's country of Jordan, to take refuge. And around 1 lakh such Palestinian refugees went towards the north, towards Lebanon, settling in Beirut and southern Lebanon as refugees. So this was seen as a great catastrophe for the Palestinians, something they had to resist, something they had to fight back in order to exert their identity, in order to take back control over their territory that belonged to them. So a resistance movement was born called the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, led by Yasser Arafat. With Beirut and southern Lebanon as the base, the PLO was born as a guerrilla outfit that would engage in guerrilla warfare, in insurgent tactics against Israel, carrying out attacks against Israel repeatedly. So Israel would counter this with force, as Israel would see the PLO as a security threat. It would target the PLO, which was based out of Lebanon, and thus Lebanon and its people, they basically came in between the crossfire between the PLO and the state of Israel. In 1975, in fact, the country even witnessed a big civil war as the people of Lebanon were divided on sectarian and religious lines. This civil war lasted until 1990. It was a result of all the developments involving Israel and Palestine. The Lebanese population itself was largely divided on what kind of support to extend to the Palestinians and to the resistance movement under PLO. So in 1982, Israel made an attempt to kick out PLO from Lebanon. Israel invaded Lebanon and it managed to decimate the leadership and the bases that PLO had established in Lebanon. The PLO was pushed out of Lebanon and it shifted base to Tunis. So, as Israel got more militarily involved, Lebanon and its Shia population, especially in the southern parts of the country, they would align with the other forces in the region, especially post 1979, as Iran had come up as a radical conservative Shia theocracy, willing to take up the cause of the Palestinians, willing to support the Palestinian movement. And as it picked its rivalry with Israel, Iran quickly expanded its conflict through covert methods by creating an axis of resistance, by sponsoring proxies, and Hezbollah would be one of the first such experiments. In fact, Hezbollah was a byproduct of what Israel had done in Lebanon and what Iran would start doing from 1980s. It was a combination of both. If not for Israel's invasion of Lebanon to target PLO, the Shia population would have never been antagonized to that extent. It was this antagonized Shia population that was exploited by Iran, and Syria became the convenient bridge in between. Syria, under the Assad family, a close ally of Shia Iran, would act as the conduit, a land bridge connecting Iran with Lebanon, so that IRGC and the Quds Force could supply arms, weapons, funds, and provide training to this new radical extremist group that was born in Lebanon called Hezbollah. And Hezbollah very quickly became a proto state on its own. It infiltrated every branch and every arm of the Lebanese government and society to an extent where Lebanese government has itself been subverted. Hezbollah maintains its own parallel administration. It has representation in Lebanese parliament. It controls the economy and judiciary as well. Lebanese armed forces are so weakened that Hezbollah is seen as the primary fighting force of Lebanon. So, to that extent, Hezbollah has infused itself into the politics and the society and the economy of Lebanon with the backing and support of Iran. So, that's the reason why such enmity exists between Israel and Hezbollah. And each and every time Israel tries to target Hezbollah, it's the innocent people of Lebanon who end up paying the price. So, post 1982, with the rise of Hezbollah, Hezbollah quickly accumulated its artillery power, rockets, missiles with support from Iran. And whenever there would be skirmishes or clashes, Hezbollah would use the southern part, especially the territory located here to the south of the Litani River, to fire the rockets and missiles at northern Israel, causing significant damage against the civilian villages and towns located in northern Israel. And each and every time Israel would try and cross the international boundary, the IDF would invade into southern Lebanon to dismantle Hezbollah bases. So this became a never ending conflict. By 2000, Hezbollah, which was strengthened by Israel and Syria, managed to push back the IDF. Eventually, Israeli defense forces, they had to retreat. And a UN mediated ceasefire was implemented. So this border became the blue line of the UN. The UN blue line was created through a UN resolution, and a UN peacekeeping force was deployed, the UNIFIL. Even today, the Israel-Lebanon border, the blue line that you see here, is manned by UNIFIL forces. Even India is a contributing country. India is one of the troop contributors. We have around 900 plus Indian soldiers who are part of the UNIFIL mission. So this further emboldened Hezbollah that they managed to push back Israel. And as Hezbollah stepped up its attacks against Israel, Israel made another attempt in 2006. Israel again attacked Lebanon, triggering a much wider conflict and a civil war. So following these conflicts, Hezbollah's position strengthened and especially to the south of the Litany, it has created a lot of stronghold bases. And that is exactly what Israel wants to target. Though under the UN mediated ceasefire, Hezbollah is not supposed to be present to the south of Litany. It's supposed to move back to the north of Litany. And IDF is never supposed to cross the blue line. Both sides have broken the ceasefire commitments repeatedly. So, after the October 7th attack in 2023, after Israel launched a massive war against Gaza to decimate Hamas, one of the Iranian proxies, obviously Hezbollah came to the assistance of Hamas, acting as an Iranian proxy to target Israel from the north. So, after Israel managed to weaken and almost wipe out Hamas, it shifted focus towards Hezbollah by 2024. And within few months, Israel crippled and almost wiped out the top leadership of Hezbollah. It started with the deadly pager attacks, where Israel had managed to infiltrate and plant explosives through supply chain interference in pagers and walkie talkies that were used by Hezbollah fighters and commanders. Though the pager attack did not cause much damage, it had a huge demoralizing effect that Israel could strike anywhere. It was a clear message, a symbolic message from Mossad and the IDF that we are everywhere, we listen to you, we watch you everywhere. Within few weeks after the pager attacks, Israel went all in with precision deadly airstrikes aimed at Hezbollah's leadership. Eventually, its supreme leader, Hassan Nasrallah, was eliminated. Most of the top mid-level commanders were taken out. Even several IRGC officers who were coordinating with Hezbollah leadership, they were all wiped out by Israel in these targeted strikes. So by 2024, Hezbollah was almost wiped out and decimated as well. Though the cadre remains, the top leadership and its network, its logistics and financing route has largely been weakened, if not completely wiped out. But the biggest blow for Iran and Hezbollah was in December 2024, when Bashar al Assad in Syria was toppled by the Hayat Tahrir al Sham, a former Al Qaeda faction led by a former Al Qaeda terrorist. And today, the same leader of HTS has become the president of Syria, Mohammed al Shara. With Assad's regime gone, the direct connection between Iran and Hezbollah was severed. The connection between Iran and Hezbollah was broken. See, previously, Hezbollah was involved in supporting Assad's regime as he was dealing with a civil war and a rebel movement from 2011 onwards. So, Hezbollah had been a prominent regional actor. But once the Syrian regime fell and Hezbollah's leadership was taken out, we saw that Hezbollah quickly lost its capabilities. And that led to the new ceasefire that was worked out with the mediation of US and France, where Hezbollah again committed to retreat beyond the Litany, to the north of Litany. And IDF was also committed to withdraw all the troops from southern Lebanon and thus re-establishing this buffer zone that would be largely monitored by UN at the Blue Line through the UN Peacekeeping Force, the UNIFIL mission, and by the Lebanese armed forces. Only the Lebanese armed forces were allowed to carry weapons and maintain presence in the buffer zone over here. This ceasefire also held for more than 1 year. But now, with the start of the Iran war, Hezbollah has jumped into the conflict. Hezbollah has used this time post the last ceasefire to regroup and revive its capabilities. And it possesses a formidable arsenal of artillery, rockets, drones, missiles. And Hezbollah started launching them directly aimed at Israel. But what's interesting is that during the last year's 12-day war, Hezbollah didn't get directly involved. But now, since Iran's leadership was taken out, Ayatollah, the supreme religious figurehead, was eliminated. That's what pushed Hezbollah to take revenge against Israel, leading to fresh fighting. And now, Israel has completely focused on Lebanon, especially after the 2 week ceasefire was announced between US and Iran. And Israel used heavy bombardment and disproportionate force. In 10 minutes, they dropped more than 100 bombs on Beirut, that too on civilian locations without giving any notice, which in itself is a war crime. So Israel has ended up slaughtering many civilians while killing several Hezbollah militants as well. So it is indeed a complex conflict, but the ceasefire and the talks which are going on, they are much needed. Because see, today in Lebanon, even the people of Lebanon, they have lost that sympathy, whatever they had for Hezbollah and the Palestinian cause. Because Lebanese economy has taken a massive hit. It's the country has been completely destroyed, right? It today faces alarming levels of poverty. Infrastructure has suffered significant damage. And today there is a government in place which is not entirely pro Shia militias such as Hezbollah. So they are eager to strike a peace deal with Israel and kick out Hezbollah from the territory so that they can rebuild the country. So in the last couple of years itself, more than 5,000 Lebanese civilians have been killed because of Israelis bombardment. That's why the ongoing talks are very, very important. Finally, Israel agreed for a 10-day ceasefire after Iran made it a precondition. Iran said, we'll talk to US only if Israel stops the fighting on all the fronts. Now, this 10-day ceasefire has just been extended to a 3-week ceasefire. Just a few hours ago, last night, Trump has confirmed that US, which was acting as a mediator between the Israeli and Lebanese representatives, they have managed to work out a 3-week ceasefire, and hopefully this should bring back some normalcy to Lebanon. But again, it depends on how the US-Iran talks will progress in Pakistan. If the war resumes, there are very high chances that the fighting might resume in Lebanon as well. Because Israel, it has always said that it will use this opportunity to wipe out groups like Hezbollah and Hamas. And the concerning point about Israel is that it doesn't care about the collateral damage and civilian casualties. In fact, Israel adopts this controversial doctrine called the Dahiya Doctrine. Israel has been adopting this since 2008, where they will deliberately use excessive disproportionate force even on civilian targets. Israel has tried to use this as a leverage, create a leverage out of this by deliberately bombing civilian locations, by causing unacceptable damage. Israel tries to gain the upper hand, and this is often referred to as the Dahiya Doctrine of Israel. This is very controversial. This goes against every tenet of international law. These actions amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity. But as I said, the conflict itself is deep rooted and very complex. But now, for the people of Lebanon, the ceasefire brings some relief. And Lebanon used to be a very important partner for India. India had very good relations with the country. But now, because of the hit the country has taken and the persistent conflict it has seen, India-Lebanese relations also have been affected. So please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Now let's move to the next topic, another major article that's related to climate change. The article is specifically focused on adaptation. See, when you talk about climate change and climate action, there are 4 pillars under climate action efforts. If you look at the negotiations under UN Framework Convention on Climate Change and the proceedings at the COP, at the Conference of Parties, there are 4 main pillars on which the issues are discussed. One is adaptation, the other is mitigation, third is finance, and fourth is technology. These are your 4 pillars of climate change negotiations. So we need to understand what is adaptation, how is it different from mitigation, and what's the role of finance and technology. This article here is entirely focused on scaling climate adaptation from policy level to grassroots level. So first, let's talk about adaptation, and then we will discuss as to what the author is trying to uh, project in this article. See, for countries like India, it is extremely important to address the climate risk that we are facing. According to global studies, India faces the 9th highest climate vulnerability in terms of increasing extreme weather events, in terms of economic loss, in terms of impact on human health and safety. India is rated as the 9th most vulnerable country with regard to the impact of climate change. And in the last 3 decades, from 1995 onwards till 2024, we have witnessed at least 430 extreme weather events in the form of cyclones, floods, etc. And this has a devastating impact, not just on human health, but on the economy, but on infrastructure, even on the environment. According to a study, the world is losing 247 billion work hours because of the impact of extreme weather events. So, the economic impact, the social impact is massive. So, right now, India is prioritizing the focus on climate action. We have recently updated our nationally determined contributions, which are the voluntary targets of India under the Paris Agreement. So for the 2031-35 period, India has recently announced its updated nationally determined contributions, and they align with the Belém adaptation indicators that was adopted at COP30 in Brazil last year. So the goal set for the world is to triple adaptation finance. Right now, there isn't enough finance being provided for adaptation measures. So at COP30, countries have taken up a commitment to triple finance for adaptation measures. And there are specific indicators they have identified, specific areas where the money can be invested to promote adaptation measures. So first, let's understand, what do you mean by adaptation? See, adaptation is completely different from mitigation. When you talk about climate action, mitigation refers to primarily reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So, for example, if the focus of climate policy is entirely on reducing the usage of fossil fuels, transitioning to clean and renewable energy, that is what we call as mitigation efforts. Bringing down emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, and other greenhouse gases. So bringing regulations on industrial activity, capping emissions from transport sector, or trying to deal with emissions from agriculture and animal husbandry. All these measures taken to reduce your emissions and switch to cleaner forms of energy to decarbonize your economy, they fall under the bracket of mitigation measures. Whereas adaptation is completely different. Under adaptation, you basically try to adapt to the new climate reality. Since climate change is a given reality, it's a given fact, you prepare the world to better deal with the impact and consequences of climate change. Let's understand this with an example. See, we have understood that global warming, climate change directly affects agriculture and crop productivity. But if you can help farmers with climate resilient, smart agriculture so that they can withstand the impact of droughts and heat waves, etc., that is an adaptation measure. You're trying to live in this new world through certain interventions where you support the population, help them save lives, save the economy, at least reduce the impact, and manage to survive and adapt. Similarly, for coastal communities who face the risk of rising sea levels, submergence, or increased cyclone and other disasters, protecting coastal areas, fishing communities, equipping them better, training them better, creating better livelihood opportunities for them. These are your adaptation measures where you adapt to the reality of climate change. But right now, the world is more focused on mitigation, including India. In fact, there is almost an obsession with mitigation with very little focus on adaptation. Now, for both the steps, you need finance and technology. That's where the third and fourth pillar of climate action comes in. Right? You need money and technology for both adaptation and mitigation. I hope you're getting my point. To reduce your fossil fuel dependency and switch to cleaner forms of energy, you need money, you need new technology. Similarly, for adaptation as well, you need money and technology. So these are your third and fourth pillars. So when you look at climate policies in India and across the world, there is a greater obsession with mitigation without giving adequate attention and focus to adaptation measures. That is why in this article, the writer is stressing on the need to scale climate adaptation from policy level right to the grassroots level. So when you look at the Belém indicators that were adopted last year at COP30 in Brazil, it has identified a set of 59 voluntary non-prescriptive metrics in sectors like water, food, agriculture, health, infrastructure, poverty reduction. There are specific targets that are identified here, which countries can take up if they want. It's voluntary and non-prescriptive, right? And this brings global focus on adaptation measures. That's what is referred to as the Bellum indicators or Bellum adaptation indicators. So India right now does implement few adaptation measures, but the scale of it is not enough. For example, if you look at agriculture sector, the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, ICAR, it implements the national innovations in climate resilient agriculture to help Indian farmers to adopt climate resilient crops, crops which can withstand extreme heat and drought conditions. So India is re-engineering its farming through such initiatives. Similarly, there are initiatives aimed at coastal communities, initiatives aimed at urban areas. For example, ensuring that all wetlands and lakes are revived in urban areas to deal with the impact of urban flooding, or to use them as natural buffers and moderators to deal with the impact of heat waves, as we discussed earlier. All these are adaptation measures. And right now, India's investment in adaptation is bare minimum. While we are focusing more on mitigation, our financing of adaptation measures is not sufficient. This is identified even by the Economic Survey. If you look at Economic Survey report, it identifies that we need at least 5.6% of our GDP to be spent on adaptation measures to help India cope with the impact of climate change and extreme weather events. But if you look at the union budget and the allocations made, there is a big difference from what's required and what's actually being allotted. So, according to the UNEP's adaptation gap report, the world is now facing a deficit of 284 to 339 billion dollars in adaptation finance by the end of 2035. In this decade, the world will fall short, according to UNEP. It brings out the adaptation gap report, according to which the world will fall short for adaptation finance with a range of 280 to 350 billion dollars, meaning there isn't enough money being put into adaptation measures. So India has this draft framework of climate finance taxonomy that was released last year by the Environment and Forest Ministry, where mitigation focused measures are being prioritized by the government. Emission reduction measures are the top focus and priority, with little focus and attention on adaptation measures. So that is why the writer is suggesting that we need an adaptation policy at the national level. And this has to be implemented at the grassroots community level, where every village, every ward can be strengthened to become resilient against the impact of climate change and extreme weather events. But this requires adequate funding. It requires right technology, institutional framework, which is largely missing as of today. See, even at grassroots level, you see the focus is primarily on mitigation measures to bring down emissions. But adaptation has not been the priority. And that's what the writer is urging, that at the policy making level, at the national and state level, we should prioritize adaptation, ensure enough money, technology, institutional support is provided, and legislative regulatory support is provided to the grassroots institutions like panchayats, municipal bodies, so that the community can become resilient at the grassroots level to withstand the impact of climate change. Now let's move to the next topic. We have a set of small articles before we take up the prelim section. India is all set to host the fourth edition of India Africa Forum Summit. Now, this is a very, very big development. First, let's talk about the India Africa Forum Summit, the history. Then you'll understand why this is so important. See, in 2008, the then Manmohan Singh government launched one of the biggest foreign policy initiatives of India, which was an outreach towards African countries by establishing the India Africa Forum Summit. The goal was to engage with African Union and all the 50 plus member countries of the African Union to bring India closer to Africa. Because don't forget, we share historical, ancient maritime linkages, trade linkages, and colonial bonds with Africa. We have a shared history of struggle against colonial imperial oppression. We have common goals and objectives and agendas. We have large populations to take care of. We have similar socio-economic problems from fighting poverty to improving healthcare. Plus, Africa is blessed with resources, which is an opportunity for India. India has the talent and the capital that can help African nations to harness the resources for mutual benefit. And Africa has always seen this great power competition. First, it was the European colonial powers, then it was US and Soviet Union, now it is China. In fact, China has a very strong and active engagement with African nations. It has its own regular forum where China regularly meets with all the African nations under African Union, and they meet almost every alternate year. And China pumps billions of dollars through its Belt and Road Initiative. So by early 2000s, it had become critical for India to counter China in Africa and retain our unique influence, project our soft power, project our influence, and gain access to Africa's wealth and resources while contributing to the development of Africa. See, India has been the backbone of Africa's healthcare system. From diagnosis to pharmaceuticals to vaccines, India is the key supplier of healthcare support. India has launched many developmental projects. Africa is one of the largest recipients of our overseas development assistance that we provide in the form of concessional loans and line of credit. India has provided billions of dollars worth of loans and line of credit to invest in developmental programs, in community building programs. Take, for example, the Pan African e network project that was conceptualized by former President APJ Abdul Kalam. Based on this idea, India has delivered telemedicine and tele-education services to African people. By using ISRO's satellite network, India has laid OFC cables across African nations, installed satellite terminals to deliver telemedicine, tele-education services under the Pan African e network project. So there are many, many such initiatives that we can talk about. Indian companies play a very big role in Africa, from mining to agriculture to automobiles. The African continent is home to a very large Indian diaspora, 3 million Indians. They act as a living bridge connecting India and Africa culturally, socially, and we have very close people to people relations. And recently, India has even expanded its diplomatic presence. In the last few years, under the Modi government, India has set up 17 new diplomatic missions. And today we have a total of 46 diplomatic missions, embassies, and high commissions across African countries. So, back in 2008, when it was essential for India to step up its African diplomacy, the then Manmohan Singh government launched this initiative, the India Africa Forum Summit, in 2008, with India hosting the first edition of the summit in New Delhi. So, several African nations under the umbrella of African Union participated. New developmental initiatives were launched. India gave more concessional loans and arrangements. We took up training and skill development programs. We even offered technical support and assistance in various sectors. And in return, Africa has been providing India with market access, investment opportunities, etc. The second edition of the summit was held in 2011, hosted by Ethiopia at the headquarters of African Union in Addis Ababa. Then the third summit took place after a gap of 4 years in New Delhi under the Modi government. But after this, India Africa Forum Summit came to a halt. See, this is one of the drawbacks of our African diplomacy. We have not been consistent with this high level engagement. When you compare this with China, China is very methodical and punctual when it comes to holding these summits. Without fail, China hosts the summit with African nations every alternate year. Even during COVID-19 pandemic, it held a virtual summit. But for the last 1 decade, India was not able to revive the India Africa Forum Summit. It had become a low priority. There was a lot of criticism coming from former diplomats and experts that India was sidelining the India Africa Forum Summit, which was a perfect platform for us to give a push to Indian influence in Africa. Now, finally, India has revived the initiative, and next month, from May 28th to May 31st, we will be hosting African nations for the fourth India Africa Forum Summit. So, that is the importance and relevance of the upcoming summit. And Foreign Minister Dr. Jai Shankar is working with his African counterparts to put together the initiative. Before the summit launches on 28th May, all the logistics and the deals and agreements are being worked out on the back end so that there can be a successful edition, a fourth edition of this summit, which can be held. Now, please note that UPSC had already asked a prelims question back in 2016. So please take up this PYQ for your practice. Consider the following statements. The India-Africa Summit held in 2015 was the third such summit. It was actually initiated by Jawaharlal Nehru in 1951. A very easy, simple, factual question. Which of the statements is or are correct? And these are your options. So tell me the answer in the comment section below. Now let's look at the next article on page 12. There's an article related to India-Egypt defense relations. India-Egypt are stepping up their defense engagement. Please remember, Egypt is a key partner for us because, see, first of all, we were the co-founders of the non-aligned movement. Since the days of Prime Minister Nehru and the legendary Egyptian leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, India has enjoyed fantastic relations with Egypt. Right? We were the founding fathers of the non-aligned movement, along with Indonesia, Ghana, and Yugoslavia. So there is that common ideological connection, ancient civilizational connect as well. But today, Egypt is strategically very, very crucial because of its control over the Suez Canal. The Red Sea maritime corridor, which is so critical for India's economy, depends on Egypt. Given the conflicts that are raging here, right? The blockade at Hormuz, how Houthis have attacked the movement of ships in Red Sea since 2023, the presence of piracy near Gulf of Aden. All these are major risk factors for Indian economy because a large percentage of India's trade, exports and imports, including energy trade, passes through the Red Sea corridor via the Suez Canal to connect with Mediterranean Sea and the Western Hemisphere. That's why maintaining close connections and ties with Egypt is extremely critical. Egypt has been very helpful in some of our evacuation missions as well. When we evacuated Indians from Lebanon, Libya, Sudan, in all these evacuation missions, we have relied on the Suez Canal, and Egypt has been more than welcoming to support India. Today, Egypt is looking at closer defense ties with India. In fact, recently, the Egyptian president, Mr. Sisi, was invited by India as a chief guest for the Republic Day parade just a few years ago. And India is offering defense equipment, including the light combat aircraft Tejas, the Akash surface to air missile, and other military hardware is being proposed to Egypt. Egypt is considering the idea of buying weapon systems from India, and Egypt could become a probable partner that could import Indian weapon systems. This could boost India's defense exports. And also, please note the military exercises that we have. There are three major military exercises which can be important for your prelims. Exercise Cyclone, which is an exercise between the special forces of India and Egypt. Primarily, the Para SF of the Indian Army trains with the Egyptian special forces. They focus on counter-terrorism, close quarters combat, etc. Then we have Exercise Desert Warrior. It's an exercise between the two air forces. And Exercise Bright Star. It's a multilateral tri-service exercise involving all the three services, including the Navy. So right now, India, Egypt are promoting the maritime defense relations between the two sides. India is looking at playing a security role where the Indian Navy could be deployed constantly in the Red Sea corridor, closer to Suez Canal and Bab el Mandeb Strait, to secure the shipping channel, which is a critical trading route. Next, on page 14, we have this article related to social justice. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment has submitted its annual report, and it is quite concerning. See, this article is mainly focused on the findings of the report related to DNTs. Who are the DNTs? The DNTs are the denotified nomadic, semi-nomadic tribes. Denotified, nomadic, and semi-nomadic tribes. Most of these tribes, around 1,200 plus such communities, they were all declared as criminals by the British under the Criminal Tribes Act. This is how they mistreated the native communities and indigenous population of India. While some tribal communities were known to steal and hunt, branding entire communities as criminals with penal provisions was a pure act of colonial oppression. Finally, after India became independent in 1952, this deadly act was repealed by the Indian Parliament. India repealed the Criminal Tribes Act, and thus the notified tribes, because under the law they had been notified, these communities had been notified as criminals, so they were denotified by the Indian government. With the law repealed in 1952, these communities were denotified. This brought much needed relief to the communities, but because of decades of targeting and oppression by the British government, these communities had fallen behind. They had become backward, socially ostracized, socially excluded, isolated. And hence, most of the tribes have been included either as scheduled castes or scheduled tribes or under the OBC list. Around 300 tribes are not classified yet. They remain unclassified. But rest of them, they have all been categorized as either SCs, STs, or OBCs so that they can use the privileges offered through the policy of reservation and other benefits given by the government so that we can uplift these backward communities and oppressed communities. But however, the report by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment is quite shocking. The report says that the state governments are not cooperating. The states are not being proactive to provide the benefits to the DNTs. See, states are supposed to issue the certificates. They are supposed to give the classification certificate based on which the community members can avail the benefits from reservation to subsidies to other scholarships. Without the certificate, they can't make use of these benefits, and the responsibility lies with state governments. According to the government's report, only 7 states in India have issued the DNT certificates. Most of them are still lagging their, they're basically dragging their feet, and they are not even giving a population estimate. They are not able to estimate the exact population size of these communities within their state. So, without such data, you can't make policies to uplift these communities. That is why there is a demand from DNT groups to classify them separately, to keep them away from SC, ST, OBC list, classify them separately, give them separate reservation, give them separate benefits and privileges. But the government says that can't be done. So, right now, in the ongoing census, this data would be captured through the ongoing enumeration process. And finally, there would be some specific data available to help policymakers. But it will require cooperation and coordination from the state governments. States are the ones which will have to issue the certificates and ensure that the benefits are delivered to the targeted beneficiaries. Next, Defense Minister Rajnath Singh has carried out a very high profile and important visit to Germany. India, Germany are stepping up their defense relations, and the defense minister has invited German companies to take part in co-production and co-development of defense systems. See, India, Germany are like-minded partners. We share very close strategic ties, and India is trying to encourage greater collaboration between the defense companies of Germany and India to focus on joint design, co-development, and co-production. This aligns with the vision of Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative. But what is more important is the P75I deal that India is pursuing with Germany. According to reports, we are on the verge of signing this historic deal. So P75I stands for Project 75I. It's a submarine deal to procure 6 conventional diesel electric submarines for the Indian Navy with air independent propulsion technology. The German defense company ThyssenKrupp Marine Systems is partnering with Mazgaon Dock Limited, and these submarines will be built in India. Germany would share the technology and they'll be built in India with largely indigenous components. And air independent propulsion will enhance the diving shelf life of the submarine. Because conventional diesel electric submarines, they have to keep coming to the surface regularly to recharge their batteries and take in fresh air and oxygen. But with air independent propulsion technology, they can remain underwater for prolonged periods of time. So after the Scorpion deal with France, uh, which have been inducted under the Calvary class, which was Project 75, we have been pursuing Project 75I from a long time to induct 6 more diesel electric submarines with air independent propulsion technology. So the deal is almost finalized. It might be announced anytime soon. And this will be a big boost for the capabilities of Indian Navy. Next, the finance minister has called an emergency meeting with the chiefs of banks and top RBI officials to discuss the AI risks and cybersecurity risk posed by Mythos, which is a new AI tool by Anthropic. Under Anthropic Claude, one of the latest model, Mythos, has generated a lot of global concern. Across the world, governments, banks are extremely worried because Mythos is designed to detect vulnerabilities in systems. It is designed to track down zero-day vulnerabilities. These are basically bugs in the code, in the software, which the developers also would not be aware of. That is exactly what hackers will exploit to gain access, unauthorized remote access to the systems, to steal data or to control the systems remotely. So, Mythos has shown remarkable capabilities in a testing environment. And in fact, Anthropic itself was so alarmed that it has refused to release Mythos in the public domain. So, what they have done, they have created a closed door coalition of American big tech companies under Project Glasswing by inviting companies like Google, Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, and others. And Anthropic will give access to Mythos only to these companies which are part of the coalition so that they can run this AI tool on their existing models and platforms, their operating systems, web browsers, and every other product that they have developed so that it'll flag the vulnerabilities and they can fix them. Because if this gets out, if such capabilities gets out, imagine what hackers can do. Imagine what state actors can do, right? You can pick up vulnerabilities that are unknown to humans, design exploits and hack into systems, which could cripple banking, which could be a big national security threat as well. And this could also be a huge cybersecurity risk for any enterprise, for any company. That's why Anthropic has paused for now. It has not released it publicly. It has created this indoor coalition where only a few tech companies are being given the first preview so that they can identify all the vulnerabilities and fix the bugs that are there. So this raises concern for India because we depend on Western enterprise systems. We depend on Western software, from operating systems to browsers to various enterprise solutions that we use in our IT sector, in our banking and financial systems. So, a AI tool like Mythos could pose a serious danger, which could be used by cyber criminals, hackers, non state and state actors to target our critical information infrastructure. That's why the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology and Computer Emergency Response Team India, they are already looking into the concerns raised by Mythos. So now the finance ministry also has jumped in, and the finance minister has held a meeting with the leaders of the banking industry to review these challenges and examine whether India is prepared to deal with such AI tools, which could completely alter cybersecurity itself. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look. On page 4 and 14, we have two separate articles that refer to a couple of important provisions under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act 1967. This is India's primary law against terrorism. So, this law empowers our law enforcement agencies, state police and NIA, the National Investigation Agency, to handle counter-terror cases. It provides for very stringent provisions to tackle terrorism, terror financing, or any association with terror groups. Even providing any form of support to a terror outfit will be prosecutable under the provisions of UAPA. But it's also equally controversial as it is said to give stringent and extraordinary powers which could be misused. As once you're accused of charges under UAPA, bail becomes near impossible. And it gives tremendous flexibility for the investigating agencies to pin the blame on the accused. And there are many cases where eventually conviction has not been achieved, but the accused have spent years and years in jails. So while it remains a controversial law, it remains our primary legal weapon against terrorism. So you should be aware of some of the key provisions. Under Section 33, investigating agencies such as NIA, they can confiscate the property of the terror accused. So please note down this provision. The law enforcement agency, which is investigating an act of terrorism, it has the powers under Section 33 to confiscate the property owned by the terror accused and attach this to the ongoing case. This is a little similar to the provisions under Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Under Prevention of Money Laundering Act as well, the Enforcement Directorate can attach property, especially if it is believed that the property is acquired through proceeds of money laundering, then any such assets and property can be attached to the ongoing case. So a similar provision is present under UAPA, under Section 33, where terror accused, their property can be seized and confiscated by the authorities, and it can be attached to the ongoing case. Then another provision mentioned in today's newspaper is Section 43A. Section 43A provides the power to arrest, to search, to carry out seizure of evidence. The authority to arrest the accused or search the property of the accused, seize any evidence from the accused. This power is defined under Section 43A, and only the authorized officer, only the authorized officer will enjoy this extraordinary power. So under the law, it is an officer of DYSP level and above who can carry out arrest, search and seizure. But in the case of Manipur, the government has issued a notification recently where even an officer of the rank of head constable can carry out arrest, search and seizure. The government has issued this controversial notification where even lower rank officials, lower rank police officers at the rank of head constable can carry out arrest, search and seizure. This is being opposed by civil society groups in Manipur, as such powers can be misused by local police officials to target the innocent people. So please be aware of these two key provisions of UAPA. Next, on page 14, there's a big controversy going on between the government and the opposition parties over the usage of ethanol in aviation turbine fuel. Recently, the government has made some changes to the fuel policy for civil aviation industry. See, in civil aviation, a specialized fuel called ATF is used, aviation turbine fuel, which is one of the byproducts of the petrochemical industry. So it's a form of synthesized fuel from hydrocarbons, but through a specialized chemical process, ATF is derived. It provides the required thrust for a commercial plane or a civilian aircraft to be able to generate the lift that is required. Now, ATF is quite expensive. It's not cheap. Now, given the ongoing crisis, the blockade of Hormuz, there is significant pressure on the availability of ATF. Plus, there is a global target laid down by the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is a UN specialized agency, that by 2050, civil aviation should become net zero emission industry. Globally, civil aviation is also moving towards cleaner fuels to bring down emissions. And International Civil Aviation Organization has set this target to become net zero industry. The civil aviation industry should become net zero with regard to emissions. So what India is doing, we are trying to align with this goal of the International Civil Aviation Organization and the UN. So going forward, India plans to utilize at least 1% of sustainable aviation fuel and slowly replace the regular aviation turbine fuel that is used in the industry. So sustainable aviation fuel is primarily made up of synthesized hydrocarbons. That is, hydrocarbons which are chemically altered, chemically processed, and chemically produced in the petrochemical industry. So this has given rise to speculation in India that India will now allow ethanol blending with aviation turbine fuel. So opposition parties are very angry about this. They're raising safety concerns because according to them, if ethanol is blended with aviation turbine fuel, then ethanol, which is of low energy density, right, it may not provide the required thrust for civil aviation, for a huge commercial airliner to be lifted. And this poses a passenger safety risk, according to critics and the opposition parties. But what they don't understand is that in case of sustainable aviation fuel, it's not that you will simply take ethanol and you pour it into aviation turbine fuel. That's not what is done. This is done in the case of your automobiles. If you look at E10, E20 petrol or other fuels that are available, where ethanol blending is done, that is a regular blending where two distinct fuels along with petrol, diesel is taken and it is blended. But in case of sustainable aviation fuel, that is not what is done. Here, ethanol derived from feedstock is chemically processed, chemically refined, and then blended in the industry itself. So they use feedstock from agricultural waste, bio waste, and ethanol is produced, but it will have very high water content. So through chemical processes, the high water content is removed. Yes, ethanol is less in energy density, that is true, but it's not blended like automobile fuel. For aviation fuel, there is a specialist process, a chemical process which is used in the industry where excess water is removed and then it is chemically blended with aviation turbine fuel. And it is commercially safe, right? It is globally certified and there are commercial planes that use sustainable aviation fuel. So there is no risk as such. And the opposition parties are not understanding that this is not regular ethanol blending like you do in automobiles. Next, the Indian rupee keeps on falling, keeps on depreciating. It has crossed the psychological mark of 94. So I think from a prelims point of view, you need to understand why the rupee keeps falling, what factors are responsible. See, on one side, the tensions related to war continues, right? As long as the ceasefire is turned into a final peace deal, the tensions will remain, Hormuz will remain blocked, and global oil prices will remain high. It has again risen above $100 per barrel. So as long as oil prices remain high and the war tensions remain, this creates a dangerous mix for India. Because see, one, our import bill increases. As fuel imports become costly, commodity prices will go up, cargo transportation cost, insurance cost goes up. Our import bill increases, which leads to widening of current account deficit, right? Then, as long as the global economy is unstable because of geopolitical factors and economic shocks, FPIs will keep exiting the Indian market in large numbers. Foreign portfolio investors, the institutional investors, they'll quickly take out the capital. It's hot money. They'll move it to safer locations like US or gold. They'll park it in safe havens. And we see a big flight of capital happening from India, along with increasing import bill and current account deficit. And that is what puts pressure on the rupee. Though RBI has intervened in the currency market, in the forex market, to pull up the rupee by selling dollars, but it has a limited impact, right? RBI has a certain limit. Though India has sufficient forex reserves to carry out intervention, it's not ideal, it's not recommended. So RBI has managed to curb the volatility to some extent, but rupee will keep depreciating unless and until the war ends and unless and until the oil prices start improving. Next, North Korea and Russia are all set to inaugurate a key bridge, a border bridge that will provide for better connectivity between the two countries. So just note down where the bridge is located, where it has been built. It has been built across the Tumen River. You can see the Tumen River here in the image. It's a bridge primarily built for cars to move between Russia and North Korea. Look at the map here. This is North Korea. This would be China here. This is Russia. And this is the far east region of Russia. You can see Vladivostok. So here, Russia and North Korea share a small border. And that's where the Tumen River marks the boundary between the two countries. And across this, a car bridge has been built, and the two countries are all set to inaugurate this bridge. Next, UK and France have signed a new border deal to tackle illegal migration that happens across the English Channel. See, the English Channel is used by human traffickers and illegal migrants to cross over, especially illegal migrants coming from Africa, West Asia. After entering Europe, they make a risky journey towards the coastline of France, and they carry out a risky journey using small boats, and migrants try to enter into United Kingdom. So to curb such illegal migration, back in 2018, UK France had signed a treaty called the Sandhurst Treaty. Please make a note of this since migration is a hot topic. Sandhurst Treaty can come as a prelims question. It's a treaty between UK and France signed in 2018 to improve cooperation and coordination between them, to curb illegal migration through the English Channel. This treaty was renewed in 2023. It's a border control treaty. Just look at the map here. You can see France, especially from coastal cities such as Calais. Several small illegal migrant boats, they head towards Dover, towards England, across the English Channel that stretches around 50 kilometers over here. Right? Be aware of the geography of this region as well. This is where the underwater tunnel is also located. There's an underwater tunnel that connects UK and France, and illegal migrants, with the help of traffickers, take a risky sea route trying to cross over the English Channel. So the Sandhurst Treaty, it allows UK and France to cooperate with each other to stop illegal migration. So now they are signing a new border deal to tackle the threat of illegal migration. Coming to the last topic, Pakistan is all set to send astronauts to space. I'm not kidding. Thanks to China, Pakistan has enlisted a couple of its Air Force pilots, and China is planning to put astronauts on its space station, the Tiangong. And Pakistan would become the first country to be part of the program. See, Tiangong is China's space station, comparable to the International Space Station. China has very ambitious plans to expand the space station. It's planning to build 6 modules by next year, and it has even worked with the UN Outer Space Office to take astronauts from friendly countries to the space station for joint research. China is working with the UN Office for Outer Space Affairs, and many countries have partnered with China, including Pakistan. Because see, if you're aware, Pakistan relies on Chinese satellite networks. Last year, a Pakistani satellite was also launched by a Chinese launch vehicle. Because see, Pakistan doesn't really have a credible space program of its own, right? It does have the Space and Upper Atmosphere Research Commission, SUPARCO, but most of what they have launched, they have landed in the sea. But it relies on China's capabilities, and that's where it becomes a formidable challenge for India. So as India is gearing up for the Gaganyaan mission, this is Pakistan's counter. And Pakistan would become the first country to place astronauts with China on the Tiangong space station. Just be aware of this key development in our neighborhood. So, on this note, we bring the analysis to an end. I hope you found the session to be interesting and insightful. If you benefited, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.